The dog barked uncontrollably at the baby. What the father discovered was terrifying. Before the story begins, if you like our channel, subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. And now, we invite you to enjoy a story with an unexpected ending. It was a peaceful evening in the small home of Marcin and Ania, nestled in a wooded village on the outskirts of Krakow. After a long, tiring day of caring for their 8-month-old baby, Oleg, the couple finally found a moment of calm. Oleg had gone to sleep early, and Kuba, the family dog, was lying quietly on the living room rug. The silence was broken only by the gentle rustle of the wind swaying the trees outside. Around 2:30 in the morning, Marcin was abruptly awakened. A loud bark echoed through the house. He opened his eyes, disoriented, trying to make sense of the commotion. "What was that?" he murmured, glancing to his side. Ania was still fast asleep. The barking grew louder, followed by the sound of claws scratching against the wooden floor in the hallway. It was Kuba, and he sounded frantic. Something was wrong. Kuba rarely barked, especially not in the middle of the night. Marcin, still groggy, rubbed his eyes and tried to ignore it. But Kuba didn't stop. His barks became more urgent, almost like a cry for help. Anya stirred in her sleep, disturbed by the noise. "Marcin, go check on him. He never acts like this without a reason." Sighing, Marcin reluctantly got out of bed. He knew Kuba well enough to understand that something unusual was happening. Barefoot, he walked down the hallway, his heart beating faster with every step. As he approached Oleg's room, he saw Kuba standing in front of the door, his body tense, as if he were guarding something. The Polish shepherd looked up at Marcin with an almost human expression of concern. His paws scratched at the door as he let out small whines, as if pleading for help. "What is it, boy?" Marcin asked, trying to calm the dog. He glanced at the ibidi closed door to Oleg's room and felt a chill run down his spine. Though he hadn't heard any noise from inside, Kuba's intensity was enough to make him wary. Marcin's hand rested on the doorknob. For a moment, he hesitated. What was he about to find? Taking a deep breath, he slowly opened the door. The light from the hallway spilled into the room, revealing a seemingly tranquil scene. The crib stood in the corner on the right, and little Oleg slept soundly under his blue blanket. But Kuba didn't. "Relax." The moment the door opened, he bolted into the room, heading straight for the crib. He stopped abruptly in front of Oleg, his body rigid like a statue. He wasn't barking anymore, but he was growling softly, staring at something in the dark corner of the room. Marcin looked around, puzzled. There was nothing out of place, at least nothing he could see. He began to feel foolish for worrying so much. Maybe Kuba was just agitated by a noise outside. "Everything's fine here, Kuba. Go back to bed," Marcin said, trying to sound confident. But Kuba didn't budge. He turned his head to look at Marcin with intense eyes, then refocused on the dark corner. That's when Marcin noticed something strange. A cold draft swept through the room, sending a shiver down his spine. He glanced at the window, but it was shut. The tension in the air was palpable. Kuba's growling grew louder, as if he were confronting an invisible enemy. For the first time that night, Marcin began to doubt himself. "What is it, boy?" he whispered, feeling a chill crawl down his back. He knew he needed to trust Kuba. Something wasn't right, and this was only the beginning of a night he would never forget. Kuba, the Polish shepherd, had always been more than just a guard dog. From the moment Marcin brought him home from the shelter, he was a part of the family. Back then, Kuba had been just a skinny pup with dull fur and a lost look in his eyes, as if life had already robbed him of something precious. Marcin still remembered the day he first met Kuba. The shelter was crowded with dogs of all ages and sizes, but it was the sad-eyed puppy in the corner of the cage who caught his attention. Kuba sat huddled in the corner, ignoring the visitors, as if he'd given up hope of finding a home. "Let's take him, Anya," Marcin said. "He needs us." It took patience to help Kuba adjust. In those first months, he was wary and easily frightened by sudden movements. But Marcin and Anya's love worked wonders. Over time, Kuba revealed himself to be a loving and deeply protective dog. He followed Marcin around the house like a shadow, and lay beside Anya whenever she seemed tired or upset. When Oleg was born, Kuba seemed to instantly understand that his new mission was to protect the baby. While Marcin and Anya were still figuring out sleepless nights and endless bottles, Kuba was already on high alert. Whenever Oleg cried, Kuba was the first to reach the nursery, sitting beside the crib as if waiting for instructions on how to help. Marcin began to notice that the bond between Kuba and Oleg was something extraordinary. One afternoon, while Anya napped on the couch, Marcin was on the floor playing with Oleg, who had just learned to sit up on his own. Kuba, always nearby, brought one of his rubber bones and gently placed it beside the baby. Marcin laughed. "Sharing your treasure with him, Kuba?" he asked, scratching the dog behind his ears. Without words, Kuba seemed to embrace the role of an older brother. During walks in the park, he never strayed from the stroller. When strangers approached, he stayed alert but calm, as though he had a sixth sense for detecting any threat before it became apparent. Anya often joked with Marcin. "Sometimes, I think Kuba understands what's going on with Oleg better than we do." But that night, when Kuba began barking and scratching at Oleg's bedroom door, Marcin realized the dog was trying to tell them something important. Kuba's behavior was unlike anything Marcin had ever seen. He was restless, as if fighting an invisible force to protect the baby. When Marcin opened the nursery door and saw Kuba dart straight to the crib, he was struck by the dog's intensity. Kuba stared intently at Oleg, yet it seemed as if he were watching something else. Something Marcin couldn't see. For a moment, Marcin was torn between logic and instinct. Why trust a dog so completely? But then again, Kuba had never failed to protect the family before. And, in that moment, his behavior was no joke. As Kuba alternated his gaze between the baby and the dark corner where the dresser stood, Marcin felt a growing sense of unease. He decided to investigate. It was as if the bond between Kuba and Oleg was so strong that the dog could sense the baby was in danger, even when everything appeared normal to Marcin. Kuba wasn't just reacting, he was warning. And soon, Marcin would discover that this connection would save the baby's life that night. As Marcin stepped into Oleg's room, he immediately felt that something was off, even though everything seemed in order at first glance. The faint glow of streetlights filtered through the curtains, casting a soft light across the room. The baby was sleeping peacefully in his crib, the blue blanket pulled up to his chin. But Kuba wasn't convinced. The dog stood rigid beside the crib, his posture tense and his gaze fixed on the corner of the room, where an old wooden dresser, inherited from Marcin, grandmother, stood. He let out low grumbles, as if trying to alert Marcin but unsure how to express the urgency. Marcin approached, trying to reassure Kuba. "Oleg is fine, boy. Maybe it was just a noise from outside." But as he said it, Marcin noticed something that made his breath catch. The temperature in the room felt oddly colder than the rest of the house. He glanced at the window. It was shut tight, as were the blinds. There was no reason for the icy draft that seemed to chill the room. He tried to shake off the uneasy feeling, but Kuba's unwavering focus on the same spot kept him on edge. The dog wasn't moving, as though he knew danger was lurking right there. Marcin decided to check the dresser. Kneeling down, he opened the top drawer, where Oleg's tiny clothes were neatly folded. Everything seemed normal. He moved to the second drawer, filled with diapers and blankets. Still nothing. But when he pulled open the bottom drawer, he froze. There were small bits of fabric scattered among the clothes. Some were shredded, as though something had been chewing on them. Marcin frowned, picking up one of the pieces. That's when he noticed bite marks along the edges. "This can't be," he whispered, feeling a chill run down his spine. Beside him, Kuba's growling intensified, now aimed directly at the floor beneath the dresser. Marcin's heart raced. Pulling his phone from his pocket, he turned on the flashlight and directed it into the narrow gap between the dresser and the floor. And then he saw it. Two tiny glowing points stared back at him from the darkness. Eyes. Something was there, hiding. And Kuba's instincts had been right all along. Before Marcin could react, a furry, agile creature darted out from under the dresser, heading straight for Oleg's crib. "Oh my God!" Marcin yelled, stumbling backward in shock. Kuba didn't hesitate. The dog lunged, intercepting the creature before it could get any closer to the crib. It was a massive rat, larger than Marcin thought possible. Its claws scratched against the floor, and its wild eyes reflected the light of the phone's flashlight. Kuba attacked with precision, knocking the rat back before it could reach Oleg. Marcin quickly sprang into action. He grabbed the first thing he could find, a small empty toy box next to the wardrobe, and, with Kuba's help, managed to trap the rat inside. The creature thrashed violently, but they secured it. With the immediate danger contained, Marcin turned to check on the crib. His eyes landed on the wooden base. Kneeling, he examined it closely. Deep bite marks ran along the underside of the crib. The wood splintered, and small pieces scattered on the floor. The thought of what could have happened if Kuba hadn't acted so quickly sent a wave of terror through Marcin. The rat had clearly been trying to gnaw through the crib, possibly drawn by the baby's scent or warmth. Marcin sank to the floor, his hands trembling. He looked at Kuba, who was now calmly sitting beside the crib, as if he knew his mission had been accomplished. "You saved Oleg, boy," Marcin said, his voice thick with emotion. He ran his hand over Kuba's fur, and the dog wagged his tail gently in response. Kuba remained on alert, sniffing the air around the room, as though ensuring the threat was truly gone. For Marcin, that night would be etched into his memory forever, not just because of the scare, but because of the undeniable proof that Kuba, the rescued dog, was so much more than a loyal companion. He was a true guardian. At that moment, Marcin vowed never to doubt Kuba's instincts again. The dog had sensed danger before anyone else, and thanks to him, Oleg was safe. Marcin could barely believe what had just happened. The enormous rat was now trapped inside the toy box, thrashing and scratching against the plastic. Kuba remained by its side, growling softly, as if to warn that the danger wasn't entirely gone. Meanwhile, Marcin tried to process the terrifying scene. His eyes were fixed on the base of Oleg's crib, covered in bite marks. The thought of that rat potentially harming his baby made his breath quicken. Grabbing his phone, he snapped a few photos of the damaged crib base, almost as if he needed proof that this wasn't some horrible nightmare. Marcin knew he couldn't simply ignore what had happened. Carrying the box with the trapped rat, he headed straight to the kitchen. There, he improvised a heavy lid to ensure the animal couldn't escape, and tried, calling a local pest control service. It was late at night, and no one answered. He'd have to wait until morning to deal with the issue fully. When he returned to Oleg's room, Kuba was still lying beside the crib, alert like a bodyguard. Marcin knelt to stroke the dog, feeling gratitude swell in his chest. "You're amazing, Kuba," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "I don't even want to think about what could have happened without you." Ania, now awake, entered the room with a worried expression. "What's going on? Why won't Kuba stop barking?" Marcin explained everything, recounting how Kuba had alerted them to the rat and prevented it from reaching the baby. Anya looked at the dog in disbelief, and then at Oleg, who was still sleeping peacefully. She knelt beside the crib and gently petted Kuba. "He really saved our son, Marcin. It's terrifying to think about what could have happened." As Anya checked on Oleg to ensure he was completely unharmed, Marcin began inspecting the room for clues about how the rat had gotten in. He moved the old wooden dresser, and to his horror, discovered a small hole in the wall near the baseboard. It looked like an entryway to the basement, a place they rarely visited and had likely neglected. "Anya, look at this," Marcin said, pointing to the hole. "That's how it must have gotten in." Anya sighed, clearly unsettled. "We need to deal with this right now. We can't risk another rat getting in here." Marcin nodded in agreement. He grabbed a thick towel and used it to temporarily block the hole while making plans to reinforce the house in the morning. Even with the hole covered, he knew he wouldn't sleep soundly that night. Kuba, on the other hand, seemed tireless. He continued sniffing every corner of the room, as if making sure no other threats remained. His vigilant behavior gave Marcin a sense of security, even in the chaos. After a few moments, Anya looked at Marcin, her eyes brimming with tears. "Have you noticed how Kuba is always looking out for Oleg? It's like he knows Oleg needs him." Marcin nodded, still overwhelmed by everything that had happened. He'd never doubted Kuba's love for the family, but that night the dog had proven he was far more than just a loyal companion. He was a protector, someone who, even without words, could sense the gravity of a situation before anyone else. When the room finally settled into silence, Marcin sat beside the crib, watching Oleg sleep. The little boy clutched his blanket, in one hand, completely unaware of the night's events. Kuba lay down next to Marcin, resting his head on his father's lap as if to say, "Mission accomplished." Marcin ran his hand through Kuba's fur once more and whispered, "You're the best dog in the world, you know that?" That night, Marcin made a decision. He would never again underestimate Kuba's instincts. Animals like him didn't act on mere impulse. They sensed dangers humans often overlooked. By dawn, the chaos of the night had given way to clarity. In the daylight, Marcin took the trapped rat to be safely disposed of and contacted specialists to inspect the entire house. The hole was sealed, the basement cleaned, and protective measures put in place to ensure nothing else could threaten his family. But for Marcin and Anya, the true hero of the night was Kuba. He had protected Oleg with an instinct that felt almost supernatural, and it reinforced something Marcin already knew. The love of an animal for its family is pure and unbreakable. The morning sun streamed through the curtains as Marcin sat at the kitchen table, holding a cup of coffee. He hadn't slept after the night's events, but somehow he didn't feel tired. All he could think about was Kuba, the dog who, in a single night, had proven himself to be much more than a pet. He was the family's guardian. In the living room, Kuba rested on the rug, finally relaxed after a night of tireless vigilance. Baby Oleg, blissfully unaware of the danger he had faced, played contentedly in his playpen, smiling at Kuba whenever the dog moved his head. "He's still watching over Oleg, even now," Anya remarked, sitting beside Marcin and looking at the dog. There was a smile of relief on her face, but her eyes still carried traces of the tension from the previous night. Marcin nodded, gazing at Kuba with a mixture of gratitude and admiration. "I don't know how to thank him enough for being here." Kuba saw something we didn't. He knew. As he watched the baby and the dog, Marcin began to reflect on how that night had changed his perspective. Kuba was a rescue, a dog no one had wanted, who had seemed so broken when they first brought him home. Yet, he hadn't just returned the love he was given. He had shown that the bond between humans and animals could run deeper than words could express. Later that afternoon, after the house had been inspected and the final repairs made to ensure their safety, Marcin decided to share the story with friends and family. He sent messages and posted in local community groups, describing the frightening yet heroic night. "Our dog saved our baby's life last night. He saw danger before we did, and showed us how much we can trust an animal's instincts. Kuba is a hero, and we're more grateful than ever to have him in our lives." The responses poured in almost immediately. People shared their own stories of how their pets had alerted them to unseen dangers, everything from fires to intruders. Some even asked for advice on adopting rescue dogs. For Marcin, this was the impact he had hoped for: to show the world the value of an animal who might otherwise have been discarded. As the messages continued to arrive, Anya looked at Marcin with a soft smile. "You realize Kuba has changed more than just our home, don't you? He's changing how other people see animals, too." Marcin smiled back, his fingers pausing over the phone's keyboard. He deserves all the recognition. That evening, as Marcin tucked Oleg into bed, his hand brushed against the bite marks on the base of the crib. They were still there, a permanent reminder of that night. He glanced at Kuba, who was already lying beside the crib, as if he couldn't bear to let the baby out of his sight. "You'll never stop protecting him, will you?" Marcin whispered, stroking the dog's head. Kuba lifted his head briefly, as if he understood the words, then rested it back on his paws. For him, the answer was obvious. Oleg was his responsibility, and he would fulfill that role as long as he could. In the days that followed, Marcin and Anya made a point to show Kuba even more love and appreciation. He was given a new play area in the yard, fresh toys, and special meals. But what Kuba seemed to value most was the family's affection, the bond they shared. For Marcin, the lesson from that night was clear. Animals possess instincts that go beyond human understanding. Kuba wasn't just a rescued dog. He was a hero who used his instincts to save the life of someone he loved. As Marcin laid his head on the pillow that night, he recalled a saying he'd heard years ago. "Sometimes heroes come in the most unexpected forms." He smiled to himself, knowing he was fortunate to share his home with one of those heroes. A dog named Kuba. Kuba reminded them that the purest connections can't always be explained with words. He taught Marcin and Anya that love and protection can come from the most unexpected places, and that animals often possess a wisdom we tend to underestimate. Have you ever experienced something extraordinary with a pet? Share your story in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories like this. After all, our four-legged heroes deserve to be celebrated.